Okay. Welcome everyone to the first in a series of summer webinars that are being put on by the Midas Collaborative. My name is Kimberly Hirsch and I'm the Executive Director of the Midas Collaborative, and I'm very happy to be welcoming everyone here today for the first webinar in our series this month. Couple of logistics I'm going to start with before introducing our speakers here today. Hopefully you are aware that you have joined a session called The Housing Crisis During COVID-19, Challenges and Opportunities. The first thing to be aware of is that we are recording today's session, and a link to the recording will be made available to you all after this session, should you like to watch it again. Maybe you missed something interesting, so that will be made available to everyone. The second two sessions in this series will be offered next week and the week after. Please know that if you registered for today's session, which if you're here you did, you are automatically registered for the other two sessions. We hope you will decide to join us for those two as well. Session number 2 is on savings and debt related to the current financial crisis due to the pandemic, and structural inequities in general. And the third session the following week will be a legislative panel. We're very pleased to be bringing some legislators together from the city, state of Massachusetts, and national level to talk about potential legislative and policy solutions to the problems that we are going to be talking about today related to housing, and next week related to savings and debt and other matters in the lives of low and middle income Americans. The other thing I'd like to let you know is, again, Midas is putting on this seminar today. We are a nonprofit. We rely on donations, and as a result, we have very generous donations and the sponsorship of Mr. Cooper for today's session. We are able to put this and other programs like it on for free, and we do appreciate this session is free, but we do appreciate any donation that you may have already considered for today or may consider in the future. A couple of other logistics before we move on to the content today. You are all defaulted to mute mode, which you have probably noticed. Any questions that you have today, please go ahead and put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen throughout the session. Someone will be monitoring that box, and when we are ready to transition to the question and answer period, which will be about 15 minutes before the hour, we will be sort of ordering and consolidating some of those questions and trying to address as many of them as we can. So I'd like to also mention the speaker names, tell you a few things about the Midas Collaborative, and then I will turn it over to our panelists today. So the speakers are, we are pleased to welcome Simone Crawford, who is the Director of Homeownership Education at MAHA, the Mass Affordable Housing Alliance. Our other speaker is Rachel Regis, Resident Services Manager at Alston Brighton CDC. And today's conversation will be moderated by Molly Goodman, founding board member of the Abundant Housing Massachusetts. Midas has had a long partnership with the organizations that these folks today represent. We are very pleased that going back more than a decade, we have been able to, on a partnership basis, design and deliver various asset development programs and other programming related to serving our low and moderate income communities. So just a couple of brief words about Midas. As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit, and our mission is to promote financial security, including financial education and financial empowerment programs for low and moderate income residents of Massachusetts. We have 4 program pillars. Just to mention them briefly, this information is available on our website. We do asset development in partnership, designing and delivering asset development programs in partnership with community-based organizations. We conduct various financial education programming. We do professional development for financial coaches and teachers and others in the community and the school systems that do financial literacy programming. And we also maintain a policy and advocacy agenda and do advocate on an ongoing basis for various policies and legislation that promote equality to low and moderate income communities and communities that have traditionally been disadvantaged by the systems that we have in the US. And we currently have also added an active COVID-19 policy and advocacy agenda to try to bridge the gap between federal programs, either when they arrive or some gaps that are not filled at all. And most recently, Midas has been turning its attention to racial inequities in our system that have become highlighted much more broadly for America and the world to see as we see about all the events that are going on in the news. So with that, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you again. A big thank you to our panelists today. And I will turn it over to you, as I'm sure that's what everyone has been waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. My name is Molly Goodman. I'm going to be the moderator of this conversation. On the flyer and in the title, it says I'm the founding board member of Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. That's a new 501c4 nonprofit organization that I'm on the board of with 7 other local housing advocates who are a little younger and a little frustrated with a lack of progress. And so we wanted to move the conversation forward by taking control of the narrative and telling our stories and our lived experiences in the housing world. And I think that segues to a couple of my other roles in this organization and also with Alston Brighton CDC. I am Rachel's coworker. I am the manager of homeownership and counseling programs for Alston Brighton CDC. And I'm also a board member of the Midas Collaborative. So, and Simone, it has been my partner pretty much since day one, because we joined our organizations at similar times and we're coming into similar jobs, and we leaned on each other a lot in that first year. So it felt like the perfect opportunity for me to moderate this conversation with these 2 ladies, since we all work so closely together. And with that being said, I want to just open it up to the 2 of them to give a brief description of our organizations from their perspective, and also their job roles and their responsibilities, and just let everyone know some of the work that we do related to housing. So let's start with Simone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Molly. I want to thank Midas as well for giving us this opportunity to just speak about the issues that we're facing, especially in this climate. I also want to talk a little bit about what I do. I am the Director of Homeownership Education at MAHA. MAHA is Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance. What we do there, we have our education piece, which is we advocate and teach pre and post purchase home ownership education at the Mass Affordable Housing Alliance. We also have our advocacy piece, which is we mobilize our community and give them a voice around affordable home ownership. We are laser focused on home ownership, and so we do everything within our power to make sure that low and moderate income people, Black and brown people, people that can't afford to under normal circumstances can we advocate for them and make sure that they are able to, assimilate wealth through home ownership. Rachel.
All right. So my name is Rachel Regis, and as Molly mentioned, I work for the Alston Brighton CDC as a resident services manager. I help run the resident services program out of the Albright Community Center, which is located on Commonwealth Avenue, next door to our property management office, Maloney Properties. And basically the Alston Brighton CDC looks to preserve affordable housing throughout the Alston Brighton community. We have 506 units of affordable housing in Alston Brighton with over 1,000 residents. In a variety of different housing, tax credit, project-based housing, to a few market rents, and some condos within the Alston-Brighton community. And I am very happy to be here today to share this time with you and to be a part of this conversation.
Sorry, it looks like we're having some trouble with participants seeing video or black screen. Kimberly, is that okay? Oh, maybe the top right hand corner, you can change from speaker view to gallery view. Maybe that will help. Anyways, sorry I went off camera for a minute. I had to lock my cat in the other room because he kept trying to get on camera. But thank you for giving that overview. I think sometimes we slip into jargon about housing programs and just all this in the weeds information that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But just your average person coming in off the street trying to apply to housing is baffled by some of these terms. They don't understand what they mean, and I think it's just good to give an overview at the beginning to talk about what we do every day. So let's move on to some of the first questions. And I think we're starting off with Rachel. Specifically, the issues that you saw in our portfolio, specifically, but just across the board in Alston-Brighton and Greater Boston, the initial impacts of COVID-19, what the shutdowns did for low and moderate income families, for their budgets, for their sustainability, and for their housing situation in particular, and then your role in assisting them during that time.
Yes, so, excuse me. I mean, I think prior to COVID-19, everyone talked about the need for affordable housing, but I think post-COVID, it is evident that families low to moderate income were severely impacted by COVID-19 in various different ways. One, financially, families who weren't able to work had to stay home. Children weren't able to go to school. And so that meant that, families lost income to their household, and it impacted their ability to be able to afford to pay for rent and different other necessities. I think in the work that I do with the families that I work with, one of the things that I realized that impacted them the most was their ability to be able to access various resources without having access to internet or access to technology like a computer. I think a lot of people have a smartphone, but when it comes to like filling out PDF applications for various rental assistance programs, if you don't have access to a computer or the internet, being able to access some of those resources are difficult. I know in particular, the work that I do in resident services, a lot of the residents were able to utilize my support and being able to access some rental assistance funding. And the way that I was able to support them was by filling out applications for them on my computer and kind of being the liaison between them and the agency that is intended to provide them with that assistance. In some instances, when it came time to transfer personal documents, like for instance, when they needed a copy of their lease or a copy of their ledger, those aren't things that a lot of residents were necessarily able to access without having a social service provider present and available to kind of orchestrate that process. And so I can say that a lot of low and moderate income families are impacted in that way when they don't have access to the resources that they need in order to access the services that are intended or that are there to be able to assist them. And so that's just a little bit about how some of the families that I work with were impacted by COVID-19 as it relates to their housing.
And I think that brings up a bigger point about we were already in a housing crisis before COVID-19 hit. And so there were all these initiatives that we were working on, trying to get funding for, writing grants for. Tech Goes Home was, one of our more successful programs that Rachel was already running with our residents. But the very nature and the model of the program don't work under COVID-19. And so then, we had to think about how to pivot that. But that gets at like the basic access problem before we can even think about solving the other problems. And so not only were our residents going through this, we were also not able to be at the office, not able to have access to our systems and our tech the same way. And I imagine that Metro Boston was, I always forget their new name, but MBHP was also going through those same problems. And all of our agencies have a ton of paper-based like documentation. And these were things we were dealing with pre-COVID. And so it was just completely exacerbated. So how did you like start pivoting in terms of, we were already dealing with these housing crises, and then we like all of a sudden just everything pivoted very quickly. What changed like right away for you?
One of the things that changed right away for me was realizing how much residents really relied on resident services and the services that we provided. So for instance, we run a mobile food pantry out of our community center. And just because we weren't physically present didn't necessarily mean that the need was no longer there. And so we had to quickly think about how we still going to provide this service during these times. And so we now we're doing door-to-door delivery service to deliver the food to our residents who needed food. We were able to obtain some grant money from a local university, and able to purchase $5,000-$6,000 worth of Stop and Shop gift cards to be able to mail to some of our residents. I had to quickly learn how to utilize Zoom as a platform in order to share my screen and complete, various applications, or to do, tenant mediations via Zoom. And so the nature of the work changed quickly, but the need was still there. And so I had to really think about innovative ways to be able to still provide the services to our residents and ensure that they're connected to also resources within the community. I know that we also partnered with an agency called Starry Internet. As you know, internet is connected to, the Fire Stick, the TV, and not a lot of families can afford cable. And so we were able to partner with Starry Internet, where they installed satellites on the top of our buildings to be able to provide free internet service to the residents that reside in the properties that we own.
Awesome. Really good. So you're muted, Molly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was Starry Internet was actually one of my favorite examples of a company just generally stepping up and doing a good thing. Our home buying programs also had to pivot immediately over to virtual home buying classes. And I definitely can't say on this webinar what some of my texts to Simone said around that time, but at the very beginning in March, like there really was so much uncertainty about where things were going, and we could make our guesses, but it completely depended on the policy response. And so I wasn't expecting a boom in home ownership education classes filling up. Like I knew people would have more time on their hands. I thought they might be a little bit more skeptical of home ownership while there was such turmoil going on. So Simone, maybe you could just talk about how you initially pivoted and some of the changes that you had to make to your programs. And just in general, some of the things you've seen that were both surprising and somewhat heartening and created optimism.
Sure, thank you, Molly. And as I listened to Rachel respond, it echoes some of the things that we've been through while we are predominantly on the home ownership sphere. We still get to talk to people about different impacts that it had as COVID-19 rapidly overtake our entire system. So first, I have to say that the home ownership conversation was going on, as Molly mentioned, before COVID-19. We have a very dire situation around, affordable housing and home ownership. The city of Boston or Greater Boston, the cost of homes here is astronomical. You have people earning $80,000 a year and still can't afford to purchase a home. So we had that thing going on before COVID, right? And then COVID hits. And COVID hits, and for us, it's a shock. Even though we heard that it was happening in other parts of the world, for us, it's a shock. I remember, to give some detail, leaving the office Thursday afternoon, decided we were going to take Friday off in March, and we were going to come back to work on Monday. I'm still waiting to be called to go back into that office on Monday, right? So we were forced to pivot like immediately. We had to cancel all of our in-person classes that we couldn't go to any of our locations. We had to cancel our in-person classes, and then we had to. The team that I worked with is an amazing team. So we had to quickly transfer and transition into Zoom. We really take a look at all the platforms that were available. And then we decided that Zoom seemed to be the one that could still keep the integrity of the classes at the in-person feel, but bring it to people online. It took us 2 weeks from the time we closed our doors in Dorchester and come up online on Zoom virtually. Some of the things that we noticed, one is people were receptive to taking our Zoom classes because everyone was home. They had time. There was a learning curve because, Zoom was all the rage at that time, but not a lot of people truly understand how to use it. So first, our team had to be trained, and then making sure that our participants are comfortable around utilizing the system and our panelists or our presenters that we use in our classes.
One thing I just want to add, because both of us were experimenting with different times of, like, we offer classes in 4 sessions or 3 sessions or 2 sessions, but both of us, like, being new on the job, we were playing around with the format. What was accessible to people? What was accessible to the people that we were trying to reach? Because I think that was an important, it was a determining factor of who was actually showing up at our classes. And then this threw a whole new wrench into that.
Definitely. So we had to take into consideration all the different impacts that it will have, the nuances around making sure that we are adhering to fair housing laws, adhering to HUD requirements, adhering to our CHAPR certificate of approval to get that class up to the integrity that it was in person. But because MAHA is not only about home ownership education, right? It's also about post-purchase classes. It's about our foreclosure system. It's about organizing and making sure that we are still building relationship, even though we are moving into this virtual sphere. We had to think about all of that. One of the things that we noticed instantly once everyone shut down and people were temporarily out of work and the assistance from the federal government or the state government wasn't there as it relates to unemployment, people started to panic. Homeowners started to panic around their mortgage and how are they going to pay their mortgage. If their tenants can't pay their rent, they're not getting any rent, they can't pay their mortgage. So we had, at first, we got some influx of calls around, what to do. Then MAHA, along with other organizations and city and state officials, after some, going through the motions. Truly, they passed the moratorium around, you know, the eviction moratorium and stay off the foreclosure prevention piece as it relates to paying their mortgage that was altered for a bit. So we were in panic mode. I don't know if panic mode is the right mode, but we were so busy trying to make sure that we're touching all aspects of the graduates' lives that we have so far had, and also preparing the potential homeowners for future. And so pivoting for us, we did it without even thinking because we had to, because people were depending on us. It was one of those things where I found that we were forced to do things that we didn't think 2-3 months ago that we were doing. So all of that to say, you know, things changed dramatically, and COVID-19 also, I should touch on this a little bit. COVID-19 also highlighted some things for us, right? It highlighted just how much people of color are being victimized in this environment. It highlighted the fact that Black and brown people are the ones that are the frontline workers. They're the ones that are contracting the COVID-19 much more so than others, because they're the one that was out there. We weren't, well, I can't say we, because I could work from home, but most of my people that look like me didn't have the ability to go work from home. They had to go out and work in the supermarket, work in the nursing field just to keep bread on the table, but also to provide for the essential services that others need. So you find that it highlight the fact that they contracted the disease more. They had health issues and issues around how to locate health insurance. There are just so many nuances that you notice as soon as COVID-19 hit and we were shut down.
Absolutely. It highlighted or just exacerbated or poured gasoline on so many underlying problems, I think, that we were all working within. So, it was, yeah, I mean, like we were basically preparing for an onslaught and just not exactly sure what form it was going to take, depending on how the policy prescriptions were applied. But even before this, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the barriers to homeownership and what are the conditions of people, especially low and moderate income families, that are preventing them from getting into homeownership in the first place. That was one of the reasons that I had been focusing predominantly on student loan debt, because it was a personal issue. I personally have student loan debt that would prevent me from qualifying for a mortgage in majority of programs that I'd be wanting to use right now. So there's definitely, you know, a personal motive behind this, but I know that my entire generation is facing similar situations and much worse situations, because they might not even finish the degree and then they're saddled with the debt. They might have gone to a predatory school and then they're saddled with this fraudulent debt, to be quite honest. And then there's a whole other subset of the population that has a completely different set of barriers. And I think Rachel and I spend a lot of time thinking about the best programming for our residents in our portfolio, many of who are making 30 to 50% of AMI. Home ownership is not necessarily the next step on their path. And we don't want to be insensitive about forcing home ownership down people's throats who, one, it's not practical, they're not going to get approved for a loan in that income bracket anyways, and it's not doing them any services by, you know, boosting their confidence, boosting their credit, getting them ready. And so I want Rachel to talk a little bit more about our residents, the barriers that they're facing, and some of the interim things that she would like to see that would help them right now in this time, with issues they were facing before COVID, but that have now been exacerbated immensely by COVID.
I think, you know, to answer Molly's question a little bit, you know, some of the issues, and Molly, you're exactly right. I think a lot of, you know, a lot of families have the desire to want to purchase, to want to own, but before they can get there, some of the barriers that they face is savings and, you know, learning how do they build their savings, right? When you're living check to check, it's really difficult to talk to a resident about saving. They're like, listen, my next check is already planned for. Like, I already know what I'm doing with that. And so when you talk to them about saving, paying yourself first, right? I think that is a barrier, just helping them to understand the importance of saving, how to build savings, different ways to be able to kind of to help send their kids to college, like 501 plans. I think that is one of the barriers that a lot of the families that I work with face, is when you already have a little bit, thinking about taking a little bit of that away and putting it aside can be difficult. Especially when you don't have a lot of options to choose from. When you think about folks who are on a fixed income, they don't have a lot of wiggle room. For instance, as someone who is earning wages, who has, you know, the opportunity to perhaps maybe work overtime or get more hours. And so, you know, those are just some of the barriers that I feel like the families that I work with face. And then also helping them to access different programs that will help to increase their income, right? So training programs, I think that is, you know, one of the barriers that a lot of the families that I work with face. And then when you talk about training programs, it's like, okay, I can't work for 3 months while I'm in this program to pursue better opportunities, because they're thinking about 3 months in school with no income is a lot for a family who don't have savings, who don't fill out income tax. Like when we're talking about families who are on fixed income, they don't earn the EITC credit, whereas a family who is earning wages has an opportunity to earn that tax credit. And so I think it all boils down to being able to provide families with the education that they need in order for them to make informed choices that will kind of propel them in the direction that they want to go in.
Really good, Rachel. I can take a look at the other spectrum of that, right? So we have the people that, you know, homeownership may not be in the cards right at this very moment, but you have the other spectrum, the 50 to 100% AMI people that are working hard. Some of them are working 2 jobs for years, and want to be homeowners, and may have even started to save a little bit for home ownership, but the cost of home is so high that has become a barrier for them. So they, I think, need to be able to have some additional savings as well to help them to get into that homeownership sphere, right? We at MAHA have created this program. It's called STASH. It's a Saving Towards Affordable and Sustainable Homeownership. This is a race-conscious program, a creative idea around how we get first generation persons into home ownership. First generation meaning your parent hadn't owned a home in your lifetime. So they would be considered a first time home buyer too. This is really, really like pushing the envelope a bit, because if we think about historically from a race conscious place, we know that Black and brown people has been really left out of the housing sphere for years and years, for decades. And if you read Richard Rothstein's Color of Law, you'll hear more about how predominantly federal government really and truly helped to facilitate that. So here at MAHA, we're trying to see how we can have it, be race conscious around making sure that we provide savings, but we also teach people how to save, right? So we talk about, for instance, this program was created through a grant from the Health Initiative at Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital was able to give us this grant along with Wells Fargo to have a match savings program. This match savings program will allow participants, once they're accepted into the program, to save $2,000. We would then match them $2,000 after they've completed 8 one-hour session of asset management and credit building about homeownership. That money goes directly into the purchase of that asset, which is the home. We consider this a really good leg up, because think if a first generation home buyer has no one to turn to, you know, then they'd have to depend completely and totally on themselves. For instance, my kids, I own my own. So my kids, if I have the ability, if I really want to, I have the ability to take some money out of my home and give to my daughters and say, okay, go ahead and purchase your own home. First generation home buyers don't have that bank of mom and dad to lean on. So we figure that at Maha, Stash would be that, you know, that place that they would come to. They'll save what they can. They'll save their $2,000, and we will match them $2,000 towards the purchase of the home. We're currently trying to actually see if we can make this program sustainable, both for a longer period than the current grant from Children's and Wells Fargo is allowing us to, and also a bigger match. So it's at $2,000 now. We're hoping that we can blow that out the water, give it like a $10,000 match or a $20,000 match. We're trying to see if public dollars and other private funding can help there. And I think in this racial climate, we could really have a huge impact in that way. So I agree with you, Rachel. Saving, whether it's saving towards, you know, your child's future, or savings toward emergency savings, or saving towards home ownership, we should truly try to see what we can do to have some savings as an impact, especially around this time.
And I know Molly and I, you know, we worked really hard last year on creating a financial literacy program for the residents that we serve. And, you know, they were interested. They wanted to learn how to build their savings. And one of the things that Molly and I, we struggled with was like, we need a match savings program. Like we need a way to kind of incentivize the need for them to want to save, right? Even if it was $5 and we would match $5, I think that would encourage low to moderate income families to want to save more, right? And Molly, you could talk a little bit more about how, you know, we had this dream, right, of wanting to come up, someone to give us this money for us to come up with a program to be able to match savings for the families that we serve, because there's really a benefit to wanting to support families to want to save and increase their savings.
Yeah, I think my personal story and the opportunities that were opened up to me because my parents were able to purchase a house has always been a background for the way that I learned about these issues, that I advocate for these issues. And just I'll briefly tell you guys that my parents were able to buy a house in Jamaica Plain in 1978 for $10,000. And it was in a redlined area, but my dad's dad, my grandfather, gave him $10,000 for the down payment, well, for the entire thing, because that was the whole cost. And that has actually been the seed for his entire career since then. He became a real estate developer. He turned a single family into 4 condo units and kept one. That's the house I grew up in. It's the house that my parents still live in. They sold 3. And then, you know, he got some fire in his belly to turn into a developer and kept moving forward after that. But that's not practical in today's market in Boston, and for a number of reasons. I think zoning is a big part of it. Not even so much Boston zoning, but the suburban, the inner ring, the outer ring suburbs. They exacerbate our problems here. That's actually the seed issue that caused us to form Abundant Housing Massachusetts. Many people might know that movement as YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard. We chose to go with Abundant Housing Massachusetts as our name for a number of reasons, but it still stands that even many in the affordable housing community were very happy to come to Boston and advocate for their projects to build affordable housing in Boston. But back in their suburb, they were the first one lining up to block that 40B project. So, I mean, there's a lot of conversations that need to happen about why we are in the situation we're in, why there's no housing stock that actually is able to be used with all these new innovative programs that have been coming out, like One Mortgage, like One Plus Boston. It's a need to create these programs, and we figured out money things, we figured out available funding, and it's still not working. There's still a missing piece of the puzzle, and I think that's been pretty frustrating. So that was my little opportunity to put abundant housing into this conversation. I told Kimberly that I might pitch it a little bit. And I think the next topic that we wanted to go over and focus on a little bit, especially with a racial equality lens, is the rate of Black homeownership in this country, how it changed since, or how it was changing leading up to the great financial crisis, and how it's changed since. We've been in a very low interest rate environment for this entire time, for my entire career, actually. I don't think I saw the interest rates get above 5% since I graduated from law school. What do you think about the way those numbers have changed, and how our policy response failed or succeeded, and what you think we should do differently, Simone?
So if we take a look at the race lens, we know that we've been doing the same thing for years, and it's not doing, there's no positive or very little positive impact. I would say there's actually a widening of the homeownership gap, right? Instead of a contraction. And so while we have to be very cognizant about fair housing laws and the protected classes, we also have to be more innovative and more bold as we think about ways to truly target people that has been disenfranchised. And because the redlining is still going on, even though it's not open and prevalent and to the naked eyes, unless you walk in and do this secret shopper thing, you don't see it. While the zoning laws around our country is also very much prevalent, while the blatant racism that goes into some of these programs that are out there, while there's so many nuances that blocks the intended target audience for most of these programs, if we continue to not think of creative ways to get the One Plus Boston, the One Mortgage program, and other mass housing program, or any kind of national program into the hands of the people that truly need it and has been disenfranchised, then we're going to continue to go down that road. And I'm going to continue to say that the best way that we can see it, as the working, Ma has been in this for over 30 years, and one of the best ways that we can see it right now is through the first generation home buyer program. At 98% of the first gen people in my stash, we have 100 participants. 98% of them are people of color. Like, that's amazing. Now, we do know that Boston is predominantly negative majority, so we understand that we have more Black people here. But even with that said, that is not infringing on a protective class. So it doesn't matter the color of your skin, as long as you're first gen, you would definitely be qualified for the program. The point is, because from a systematic perspective, we know who has been shut out, then we know a higher percentage would actually be able to follow into that sphere and be able to own homes. At this point, I just think that we need to be more inclusive. We need to be more inclusive around the zoning. We need to be more inclusive about Black and brown people and what's happening out there, so that we can get people who really want to be in home ownership. We got to think about the barriers around the student loan that you talk about. Got to think about the barriers around the housing stock that's not there, and just trying to make sure that we are, better prepared and equipped and is willing, from a private sector to the public sector, to make these changes across the board.
And on the other side of the policy equation, Rachel mentioned that one of the first things that we targeted early on was that we wanted to find money for match savings to go with our financial curriculum. It felt empty. It felt almost insulting sometimes to be giving financial education about paying yourself first and savings when their income wasn't covering their basic expenses. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm too blunt, but I didn't like it. It didn't feel good. I wanted to offer them, yes, the education, but something tangible that they could take away and incentivize them to participate. And we just have not had luck getting funding for these programs. And there were federal programs, AFI, and I won't remember what AFI stands for, but it's one of the first things that just got zeroed out under this new administration. And so that funding is just not available anymore. And it's not something we've ever seen the state prioritize at a funding level. And I think that part of the webinar summer series is our hope that we can just raise these issues to other people's consciousness so that they will advocate for them too, but to understand their value and not demonize them as handouts or anything like that. They are essential to make the programs work. And I just thought Rachel could give her thoughts on the kinds of benefits we could see from state funding of MSPs like that and how it would help our portfolio in particular, but that really extends to low and moderate income families and individuals across the state of Massachusetts.
I'm sorry, I'm going to actually jump in. We may still have time to hear from Rachel on that, but I'm just going to transition us to questions, keeping an eye on the time here. So far, we've got one, which I'm going to read out loud, but anyone who has questions during this period, please do go ahead and put them in the chat box. This is a question directed for Simone about your program you were talking about on match savings. And the question is, does the match savings program have classes ongoing, and is there a pre-savings class, which I'm guessing maybe means a class regarding savings before the actual program begins, or actual saving and match happens?
So I can give you a little bit more detailed background around our match savings program at MAHA. So we have currently funding from Boston Children's Hospital that will run 3 years. That means that we had to sign up 50 cohorts every year for 3 years. We've done 50 last year, 50 this year, and 50 will be in January. What we do is you have to be a graduate of the MAHA First Time Home Buyer class in order to be eligible for it. That's the first portion of it that you have to cross. Then there are certain income specification and other things, including the first gen portion, that you must fit before you may be able to be qualified for this program. After that, there is no pre-savings class per se, apart from we have that 1 hour once per month that talks about saving, talks about credit, talks about fair housing, talk about the home that you're going to purchase, how you're going to manage it. So all of that is encompassed into the 8 sessions following your acceptance into the program. During that time, you must be saving. And so every month we get a statement that we do a check-in, take a look at the statement, make sure that you're saving based on your agreement. And if not, then we reach out to you to find out what's going on. So that's the brief synopsis as to how that match savings program works. And after your 8 months, then you graduate from it, and you do have a year to 2 years to try to find that home to purchase with that additional funding.
Thank you, Simone. That's actually all the questions for now, but again, please feel free throughout the duration of this call to put your questions in the chat box. Maybe, Molly, you want to send it back over to Rachel about state level? Oh, and also just to qualify, AFI, the acronym that you were looking for is Assets for Independence, which is a large federal program that funded match savings programs for low-income people to invest in homes, home down payments, small businesses, and other key assets to transform their lives. It was not only Massachusetts, it was several states took the federal government up on their offer and was very unfortunately previously bipartisanship support for that program over more than a decade with very good results, and that was eliminated. Back over to Molly and Rachel.
Yeah, and I actually, that made me realize that I didn't launch our icebreaker poll at the beginning. So I think I'm going to do it now because it ties into this question a little bit even more. So you should see a poll on your screen. Does everyone see that? Do you guys see it, Simone and Rachel?
I can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
So the question is in your opinion, what is the best pick your top choice, the best way for low and moderate income families and individuals to attain economic stability and build wealth? And I think I'm genuinely curious to see everybody's thoughts on this. I know the audience is largely made up of nonprofit organizations and people doing work similar to ours. And we all do general curriculums and cover this stuff overall, but it's interesting to hear people's opinions on, whether these things are actually, the most efficient or the best way for us to be allocating our resources and our time. And I think it will lead into my question to Rachel about how she sees match savings being able to benefit our residents, our portfolio in particular, but just even the general demographic. What types of activities would it enable for them, and what opportunities and doors might that open?
Yeah, so I know that I can't vote on this icebreaker, but
you can give and we can show the polls. It looks like there's a few people left to vote, but I can close it now and show the.
I honestly think it's between the ability to build emergency savings and home ownership. I think home ownership builds equity. It helps, as Simone mentioned, generational wealth, and it helps open doors for especially brown and people of color. I know, just personally speaking, my parents were first generation home buyers, and just being able to see how that was able to from my grandparents to child to great grandchildren, just seeing how that was able to kind of build generational wealth. I would honestly say that home ownership is the best way for low and moderate income families to kind of attain and build economic stability. And if home ownership isn't attainable, I would say build emergency savings. Just thinking about COVID-19 and how it was so abrupt and so sudden. No one had time to kind of plan, say, hey, I know in March I'm going to be out of a job, and so maybe I should start saving. And so I think having emergency savings, being able to fall back on your emergency savings, kind of builds opportunities for low and moderate income families. And that's why I am in full support of a match savings program. I think being able to incentivize it that way will encourage families to want to save, and kind of creating goals with them. Like, okay, this is how much you can save in 1 year if you just saved $50 a week. And showing it to them in that way, I think has a lot of benefits to it. And so I do think that being able to provide the education, and not only provide the education, but also being able to support them with a match savings program would increase their ability and their desire to want to save and to want to work towards goals.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm gonna transition us to two last questions that we have from participants in the last few minutes, and then maybe we will have a minute to do a wrap up after that.
I saw them.
Okay.
One of them was already answered, so.
Go for it. Go for it, Molly. Take it from here.
Okay. One of them, Simone already answered. I also just wanted to say there were 3 people that said other. We'd love to hear what your response to other was in the chat box, if you're willing to put that up there. And did you guys see? Okay, I can close this. So, and the other thing is, in what ways would more state funding help your programs? How can we advocate for these programs to state reps and senators? Simone, do you have thoughts about that specifically?
So if it's going to take a little bit longer for me to answer this than the 1 or 2 minutes that we have leave here, I just want to say in a very brief synopsis, the 2008 crisis caused a huge stock in the housing market as it relates to homes for sale in Boston, right? So the state government had stopped supporting home ownership. They were still doing affordable housing, but of the 100% of that pie went directly to rental and other housing issues. It took almost 10 years for state to actually reinvest in home ownership. And that happened last year when the governor had like $60 million into home ownership. We need more funding around home ownership to build our stock, to help with down payment and closing cost assistance. Those kinds of funding will help people to realize the dream of home ownership. And it should come from state government, it should come from federal government, and it should come from cities and towns. It's just a big issue that we all should get behind and try to rectify. I wish I had more time to get into details around how we could do that, but I'm definitely saying First Gen is the biggest way to go. The One Mortgage program is here, One Plus Boston is here, and we need to try to protect CRA no matter what.
So I'm just looking at the other choices people submitted. One was universal basic income. And the other one was education. Education is crucial to fair and equitable wages in order for sustainability. I think I agree. I actually had that as an option in there, and I guess I didn't include it, but I'm glad that you put that in as other. Basically, the gist is without stable employment and a pathway to the middle class, it's impossible to build savings and eventually purchase a home.
Agreed.
Absolutely agreed with that as well. I think that was what Rachel was mentioning about job training and those programs. They have to be a part of the equation when we're pairing it with financial education. It is not enough to teach about savings habits if you're not teaching about ways to increase income. That's the only thing that's going to help ability to qualify for mortgage loans.
Which goes with raising the minimum wage. You know, I think with COVID-19, we saw that a lot of our essential workers were minimum wage workers, and they're bringing home $15 an hour. Now, is that worth the risk that you're taking for $15 an hour? But what choices do they have, you know? And so I think that is a very important point that you made, Jamie, about being able to, you know, I think telling our first generation that you have to go to college, like college is not the only pathway to be successful. There are a lot of, you know, trade schools, you know. I think, you know, I was reading an article not too long ago about the need for plumbers, the need for mechanics. And so I definitely agree that we need to start talking about how we're going to support our first generation, our Generation Z and our millennials, and supporting them in that way and encouraging them to seek trade schools, and that, you know, college isn't the only pathway to being able to get a good paying job, because it's not for everyone, you know.
And I think that the three of us can genuinely say that we love our jobs, as frustrating as they are at times. And I know that most people can't really say that about their jobs. And I don't know that you need a college degree to enter our fields. Yes, I mean, a lot of us have those qualifications, and they do serve me every day. I won't deny that, but when we're doing interviews, I don't know that that's necessarily what I'm looking for a successful candidate. It's a lot more about where their passions lie, and CDCs, you know, these nonprofit organizations, there is a type that is just in it for improving community, and you know, that's not necessarily going to be defined by a college degree. So I 100% agree with you there.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to do this. It's been a really lively conversation. We are right at 1:03 now, and I'm sure people have to drop off for 1 p.m. meetings. But for those who can stay on for just one more minute, do you want to do a super quick roundtable and just make a final comment to wrap up?
Sure.
Do we want a topic, or just do you want to give closing comments?
If there was anything that you did not have the opportunity to finish your thoughts on, I just did not want to cut anyone off on some of those really lively and important topics. We start to go deep on some things, so I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to just bring it all full circle.
Okay. Well, I will just say that my one last thing that we didn't touch on much is some of like the need, why, you know, Simone and my homeownership programs in particular, I think are so important, is that there are all kinds of amazing Massachusetts state mortgage programs. I always just say how lucky we are for our generation, or for my generation, millennials, right now in Massachusetts, because there's all these options out there, but people don't know about them. And when we were doing a planning call for this webinar, we were talking to our chair of our communications committee about the requirements for one mortgage. You can't have owned a home for 3 years. That's the definition of first-time home buyer. So people who had been previously foreclosed on in the last great financial crisis are now maybe at a point where their credit has been built back up, and they are eligible to buy a house again, and they are eligible for one mortgage, or similar programs. And also life events like divorce, like domestic violence, like things that force people out of homes that are out of their control. There are lots of exceptions. And I think the home buying classes are a good way to get the word out. And I wish that we were getting the word out to a greater portion of the population who maybe don't even realize that home ownership is, you know, possible for them, and sooner than they might think. So that's, I think, my closing piece.
I'm so sorry. It is 1:06, and I apologize to the panelists and everyone. We're losing people. I'm going to wrap up. I just want to say, for the people who are still on, we had 3 answers come in to the question that was put out there about what does other mean if you checked other on that poll. Answer number 1 was universal basic income. Answer number 2 is something that came from an educator who believes education is crucial and to fair and equitable wages for sustainability. And then we had another other come from a low and moderate income person in Brighton who agrees that homeownership and emergency savings are important, but key to creating economic stability is to matching people with stable jobs that pay a living wage. So words of wisdom there. Without stable jobs, he goes on to say, yeah, it's impossible to build a pathway. I think that's a perfect comment to wrap up on. Again, I thank all of you. Please remember, in addition to this wonderful session from our great panelists, we got into savings and debt a little bit today, and that is the featured topic of our panel next week. So we hope to see many of you there next week. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you to everyone who came today.
Thank you. Thank you.
seconded.